The Biden administration's infrastructure and Build Back Better plans were designed partially to address America's widening wealth gap. One of the primary goals of both plans was to uplift the nation's 140 million low-wage and poor citizens through economic and social service development. But both plans are held up in Capitol Hill as lawmakers are gridlocked. While the Republican Party has raised a substantial amount of opposition to the size of the Build Back Better plan, infighting among congressional Democrats has proven to be the bill's primary impediment. As congressional Democrats chip away at the bill in negotiations over the budget and policies of the plan, the majority of people they represent would prefer to see a bill passed that allocates more in resources that are outlined in the original proposal. A poll conducted by CNN shows that 75% of rank-and-file Democrats prefer a reconciliation bill that further expands the social safety net and climate change policies, while 84% of liberal Democrats support a bill that enacts all of the proposed social safety net and climate change policies. 76% of moderate and conservative Democrats would support the same. A reported 40% of American households have reported struggling with affording food and medical care over the past few months, with 53% of those households being black. A deal on the Build Back Better plan cannot come soon enough for these families and cannot be abundant enough. Joining us to discuss the disconnect between Democrats on the Hill and the Americans most in need of the Build Back Better plan is Bishop William Barber. Bishop Barber, what is the disconnect that you see between the lawmakers and the people on the actual ground who need this help?
The lawmakers got stuck in numbers, 3 trillion, which doesn't make any sense to people. And what the administration should have done, the Democrats should have done, is put a face on this early on, laid out the extent of the problem, 140 million poor and low wealth people before COVID, 60.9% of black people poor and low wealth. 66 million white people poor and low wealth, 78 million women, over 50% of our children, and talked about how these are the results of policies, not the result of people being lazy and immoral, and then said to deal with this and all of the impact that COVID has had, this is what we're going to do. Instead, they got caught up in the numbers, whether it's liberal, whether it's Democrat, moderate, whether it's 3 trillion or 5 trillion, wrong messaging. They need to win the messaging by putting a face on this bill and letting people know what it really does.
Your group, marched on Washington yesterday, tried to put a face on what would come from this bill. But you weren't able to meet with the president, the vice president. You met with 2 White House aides. It doesn't look like the White House is still going to try to put a face on this. What can you do to make them, follow your lead and put a face on the harm?
Well, I really think it's shameful how the handlers have blocked what the president told us himself in the Poor People's Campaign he wanted to work with us. I mean, think about the people we had yesterday. Two white women from Appalachia, black woman from Arizona, people from Kentucky and McConnell's district, and Maryland, and from white women from Mississippi. I mean, if those faces were put out there, it would change the dynamic. So we're going to keep pushing, because it's not about for us, the president or Manchin or even the speaker. It's about the people who need it the most. And we're going back next week. We're going right back on next Tuesday with another delegation. We're planning on going back to West Virginia for a major piece. We put 100,000 signatures in front of them. But we have to do this, because right now they're even talking about cutting it. Well, what are you going to cut? I mean, the bill provides universal free pre-K for 3 and 4 years. You're going to cut that. Provides more money from HBCUs and community colleges. You're going to cut that. It provides money for 9 million more children in SNAP, which we see as investments, Charles, not as entitlement. It provides 17 million working families with earned income tax credit that Ronald Reagan supported. It supplies millions of money for child income tax credit. It provides for family medical leave. It expands Medicaid to 4 million low-wage, low-wealth people. I mean, there's nothing to cut. It's already a compromise. And today, Charles, it came out that if we were to go with Manchin's number of 1.5 trillion, it would cost 2 million jobs. 2 million jobs if we go down to 1.5 trillion. So we're going to keep fighting, because for poor and low wealth people and moral leaders, this is bigger than Biden. This is bigger than the Republican Party and Democratic Party. This is about America taking a step, not even the full journey, but just a step in the right direction to invest in the very communities that really have saved America. During COVID, poor and low wealth people are the ones that saved this country. They were the first to go to work, first to get infected, first to get sick, many of them the first to die. Essential workers. That's who would be lifted by this bill. And it's a shame, lastly, that billionaires have made almost $2 trillion during COVID. And here we are arguing about $350 billion a year for 10 years. That's all. That's really what this boils down to invest in the people who have really fought to hold up this country.
Well, Reverend Barber, some of the people on Capitol Hill, some of them Democrats who are arguing that they need to slim things down, say, you know, passing any one part of this bill would be monumental. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, if you're in quicksand and you can get 1 foot out, that's monumental, but you're still going to sink. I mean, and why is that always the case when it comes to poor and low wealth people, the people who are the backbone of this country, 140 million people we're talking about? When the billionaires went to Capitol Hill during COVID, they said what they wanted, and they got 84% of the first COVID relief bill. And then the Treasury Department gave them $1.2 trillion without even going through Congress. So billionaires and corporations get trillions of things. Poor and low wealth people who fight every day, who give everything they have in this country just trying to make it, I always ask, well, what one thing? These investments are what's necessary to address issues of poverty and economic racism and denial of health care and money for public education. It's not even the whole thing. So we've already compromised. The Economic Policy Institute says we need $10 trillion for people just to get back even. So this $3.5 trillion is a step in the right direction. And by the way, Charles, we spent $21 trillion on war, militarizing our borders and so forth since 2011. We spend $750 billion a year in defense. We never have an argument about cutting that budget, even though we know that it is fraught with monies that go used in the wrong way, and it's more money than we need to protect this country. And yet $350 billion a year to invest that's going to come back 1,000-fold into the economy and to building up the gross domestic product of this nation. We can't do it because it's quote unquote for some people entitlements or quote unquote going to poor and low wealth people. I tell you, this is a serious moral moment we're in, and we've got to keep fighting for this nation to do right, because if they don't do what's right by the 140 million people in this country, it is actually going to cause an implosion of our economic system eventually.
An overwhelming percentage of Americans actually agree with expanding the social safety net. What is the disconnect here that the actual politicians can't seem to follow the lead of the people who elected them?
Well, I think the connection with Manchin and Sinema is their connection to corporate money, their connection to the Chamber of Commerce that for some reason doesn't want living wages. I mean, we saw this when Manchin and Sinema blocked living wages for 32 million low-wage Americans in the second COVID relief plan. I think for Democrats sometimes, they're good with numbers, but not good with putting a face on this. I heard Carville say today that Democrats don't learn how to sell something. They don't know how to get with the people. Sometimes, almost as some of my liberal friends, they almost seem like they're too good to put forth the very people that they claim they're trying to help. That's what's been so crazy for me, Charles. I mean, if you're passing a bill to lift up low-wage people, poor low-wage people in this country and workers, why would you not have them at the mic? I just don't understand that. It makes no sense to me why every time the president is talking, he would not allow us to have people standing around him who are going to be impacted. And then he stepped back and said, well, let me let you speak to Sue. Let Sue talk. Let John talk. Let Mary talk, and put this face on it. Sometimes I think people get lost in that Washington bubble, but it's so dangerous to the forward moving of our society. The last thing I think, Charles, is that I'm a little concerned, and I'll probably get pushback for saying this on your show, but you know, I love Sister Jayapal and the Progressive Caucus for holding the line, but that should be the Black Caucus as well, because 60.9% of poor and low-wealth people in this country are Black. And sometimes what happens, we get locked in over here on the voting rights piece and separate that from the economic piece, when in fact, we ought to be demanding both. We ought to say we're not just going to accept infrastructure. We want the reconciliation plan, and we want the full expansion and protection of our voting rights. It should all be seen together and not as separate issues.
Bishop William Barber, as always, sir, thank you so much for joining us tonight.